Right, welcome back to the program. Barrister Eze Onyekpere is joining me right now. He's a fiscal governance expert. He's the lead director, Center for Social Justice. We're looking at Nigeria's debt profile, which has been rising. Welcome to the program, and thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Where do we start from? I know you listened a bit to what Abebe Selassie, the director of the IMF department, said. That was yesterday. Some of us were on that Zoom virtual meeting yesterday. But we're talking about debt profile. I did also hear him say that the debt distress in some sub-Saharan African countries are quite huge. Let me start with the basics, which is debt bad? Borrowing, let me put it that way. Is borrowing a bad thing? Let's start from the basics.
Borrowing is a neutral thing.
Is it neutral?
It's neutral.
Okay.
It depends on what you are borrowing for. What are you applying the proceeds of borrowing for to? And how are you managing the process of borrowing? So on its own, there is nothing fundamentally wrong or bad about borrowing. But what are you borrowing money to do? And so that is where the challenge for Nigeria comes. And do you have a plan to pay back? How sustainable is it? If you are borrowing, how do you pay back? That's the question. And until you answer that, it becomes a bit problematic. And that is the real challenge with Nigeria's debts.
So, since you say it's neutral, at what point does it become harmful?
Yeah, that's these questions I raised. For instance, today, we are owing over $86.3 billion. And what it has led to is that for every 100 kobo we make, for every 1 naira we have made, we are using 82.999 kobo to service debts. 82.999, you could roughly call it 83. These figures are from the breakdown of budget performance of last year given by the Minister of Finance. These are not my figures. So roughly 83 naira out of every 100 kobo, 83 kobo, which is 83%. Now you have 17% of your real revenue left to pay salaries and personnel, to pay for statutory expenditure, and to pay for capital expenditure. In essence, for instance, in the year 2020, we got a total of about 3.9 to $4 trillion, 4 trillion naira, and out of it we use about 3.2 to service debts. So what was actually left was roughly 650 or thereabout billion. And if you remember that we paid salaries of about 3.1, 3.2, that means we borrowed about 2.5 trillion to augment whatever was left to pay salaries. So the implication is that it has reached that stage where it can no longer be thought to be reasonable. And so that is the real challenge why everybody is complaining. And the bulk of that money, you cannot say because the law, which is the Fiscal Responsibility Act, clearly states that you can only borrow to invest in capital expenditure or human development. But the bulk of the money we are borrowing, we are using it to simply pay salaries, maintain the lifestyle of the political class, and we are not investing it in capital expenditure. The bulk of our debts is domestic debts, and the bulk of them is the federal government bonds, treasury bills. These are just money that is not project-tied, with the exception of maybe the Sukuk bonds and then the green bonds, which are simply project-tied, and they are a very small proportion. They are not even up to 5% of the overall domestic debt. They are quite small, 200 billion, 300 billion, compared to these trillions. You know, so at the end of the day, we are violating the legal rules in what we are deploying the process of borrowing. And so the challenge of, the finance minister always says what we have is a revenue problem rather than, because she's always talking about debt to GDP. You don't use GDP to repay your debts. You use your revenue. And so if we had followed the law and invested in pure capital expenditure, we could have had a regenerating process where we could have even seen the impact of that investment in terms of it helping to reduce the infrastructure deficit in the economy, improve the ease of doing business, more investors, and the economy will be growing. And then as the economy expands, your revenue also expands. More companies will be available to pay companies income tax. More persons will be put in jobs. So more taxation will be available, and probably you could even start exporting more to earn foreign exchange. So at the end of the day, that level of borrowing was supposed to have helped the economy expand so that there will be little pressure, there will be less pressure on the resources you need to pay back. I mean, assuming revenue has doubled and the ability to earn foreign exchange has more or less doubled, we wouldn't be where we are today complaining about how do we pay back. So that's the central challenge for Nigeria's debts.
Okay, what we've done on our own part, our own research in-house, we've been able to put together a table of Nigeria's public debt from 2012, I think. That's how many years now down the line? About nine years.
Right.
Okay, we have it there. That's from our own research, and those figures are from the Debt Management Office.
Right.
The numbers you're seeing down there in trillion, that's the Naira terms. Yeah. But from 2012 to 2020, those figures are from DMO. Right. So you can see a gradual increase. The 2013 data is supposed to be billion at the back, $64.5 billion. So you can see increasing year by year.
Definitely.
Yes,
definitely. Increasing
year by year. Like they say in Nigeria, anything that increases doesn't come down. Anything that goes up doesn't come down.
The unfortunate is that the foreign currency component of that debt is even more challenging. Because if we were borrowing at a time, the Naira to the dollar was, say, 199, 200, 150. Yeah. And then today you are discussing 400 to 500. So that means you need more outlay of Naira to be able to service the debts. And if you look at the challenge...
So from what you're saying, the foreign exchange vulnerability has also jacked up.
Yeah, the shock has already jacked up. And you are looking at a time, all our macroeconomic fundamentals are headed south. You are looking at a time inflation rate has just gone up to 18.17. The food aspect of it is almost 22.95. You are looking at a time unemployment rate has exceeded 33%. You are looking at a time our balance of trade is not even adding up. So a lot is combined and wrong. And this is further accentuated by the insecurity. You know, a lot of all these analysis at the level of the World Bank and IMF is saying, okay, the fiscal crisis and all the challenges we're experiencing is almost being alluded to the COVID-19. This is beyond COVID. For instance, the agriculture sector, what is happening there, which is why we're having the food crisis, is beyond COVID. Is that across the Federation, farmers can no longer conveniently farm or go to their farms to harvest or to plant. And this is about the political crisis, the insecurity. So it is even beyond COVID. So a lot of things have come together. What I expect the government to do is to come clean to Nigerians, to say, look at the facts, look at the challenges. This is what we made. This is what we are using to pay debts. This is what is outstanding. This is what we need to meet up. And when you present all these facts together, you get all stakeholders on board for a dialogue on the way forward. For instance, people may be saying, oh, we don't need an increase in the price of fuel if they're talking about the regulation or things. By the time you present some of these facts, put it on the table to labor, put it on the table to private sector, everybody can now simply sit down and say, this is the way forward. Otherwise, if we continue hedging, of course, as you were reading the news, we had talked about what the former Governor Obaseki was saying, how the central bank was reacting. You could even see some tantrums being thrown. Okay, we gave you money, 1.5 trillion, you have not repaid, and you are saying we are printing money. Therefore, from May, you start repaying. That's what I saw the central bank governor almost saying. I mean, that's not the way to run an economy. This should be something that gentlemen and ladies sit down, governors, the president, members of the National Assembly, they tell themselves the truth and open up to Nigerians. There must be a way if the people trust their government and are carried along. But if we continue pretending that all is well, is a debt to GDP problem and not that we cannot afford to pay, then I don't know how we are going to survive.
You know, if we break down this public debt, Nigeria's total public debt, you know, Nigeria, we are owing countries like Japan, China, bilaterals, and some others. I want you, in the simplest of terms, to really explain to Nigerians what we're really discussing this morning. And I'm asking it because of, you see a lot of people saying, oh, Nigeria owe China so amount of money, and that we need, for a child that is even unborn, we'll have to pay so amount of money. Explain it in that simplest of terms so that people will understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, the simple explanation is that all these monies were borrowed for all of us. And even the explanation I want to give is to look at the intergenerational equity, the unfortunate aspect of it. You see, most of the people in the corridors of power, both at the federal and the state level, average age is 60, 70, thereabout. All right? In the next 10, 15 years, by the natural course of events, I'm not saying anything is going to happen, but that's the way God has created us on this planet. They are going to phase out one by one and proceeding to the other part of the world, wherever it is. So the people who are going to pay these debts are the young men and women in their 15, 16, 20, 25 who are going to become the real workers of the day. So in essence, I don't have the figures. I haven't divided it per capita.
There was a time I
didn't divide it per capita, but I know if we divide it per capita, I don't know what figures you have.
I had about 120,000 naira.
It will be more than that.
Yeah. I said when I divided it, that was like pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it will be much more than that. It will be more than 200,000. And so, if it was like this money was borrowed for maybe a service or an estate or construction that you are now benefiting from when you grow up, you will be a little bit happier when you are being taxed to pay. But if you remember that the people who borrowed it were not necessarily of your generation, they mismanaged it, and it is now for your generation to pay back, you will be extremely, extremely unhappy. Can we really ask the authorities to say, can you show us out of this $86 billion, can you show us $50 billion worth of rail services, new roads, hospitals, schools, water services, or improvement in electricity generation? Even the unfortunate part of it that after privatizing the discos and the gencos, we are still borrowing a lot to support the system, the transmission aspect of it, and to provide liquidity in the market. So at the end of the day, you begin to ask yourself, what exactly is happening? The more we say we are privatizing, the more we are borrowing publicly to now support a sector that has refused to improve, even when you are brought in the so-called private sector efficiency. So overall, I think what we need to begin to do is to think seriously. If it is in a family and your income is no longer enough to support the whole household the way it used to be, normally you call a family meeting, the man, the wife, the children, to say, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we are. We are going to cut A, B, C, D. Even if it means cutting some part of your diet, we are going to, if we used to burn generator 10 hours a day, we can consider doing 5 or 6. Make sure that the fridge and freezer is on to make sure those things are frozen at any point in time. We have the little electricity. You take those steps, but we have not taken any of them. You recall that the government had talked about implementing the Rossoneri Committee report about a year ago.
Yeah, that was last year. Yeah. We haven't heard anything.
Many hosts were raised. We thought that a committee should have been set up to say, let's now agree some parts of this report that we can immediately do. Rather, what you are hearing is that people across the political spectrum are complaining that the amount of money they are receiving, that it is small. Some of them are literally asking RAMFAC to make a recommendation for an increase. At a time, the household expenditure on consumption is falling across Nigeria. People are sinking more into poverty. Those that are receiving the very high income are already complaining that because of the falling value of the Naira, that it should be increased. Things don't happen that way. It cannot go on like that.
I just quickly had to do the calculation.
Okay, what did it give you?
156,417 naira. That's I calculated 32.2 trillion. I think that's in naira
yeah.
Divided by 206 million.
All right, but you didn't get it right. You know why I say you didn't get it right? The ways and means taken from the CBN
so it should be
is
added.
about $25 billion. You recall a couple of weeks ago, they were proposing to restructure it into long-term bonds of 15, 20 years so that it doesn't put pressure.
So adding that figure,
if you add it, you get about $111 to $112 billion. So you rework it, and you will see that it will be beyond, because we are not even discussing that. We're only discussing the one we saw on the DMO website. Yeah. So
that's what I use. So with what we saw on the DMO, each Nigerian owes 156,417 naira 47 kobo. So it increased. The last time I divided it to, I did my research, 120,000. That was before 2020, the pandemic.
Good.
So anyway, we are not in a maths class this morning.
Yeah, but
we've just got
that
to
gives you a picture of where we are coming from and where we are supposed to be proceeding to. But unfortunately, the fiscal crisis bedeviling this administration is like between a rock and a very hard place. There's no way, the way they're going, it is going to be impossible to stop. Because if you stop, it means salaries will be owed. If you stop, it means that like people in the National Assembly, you not give them money to run. So
what's the option? Because what are the other options other than borrowing?
Now, the options are many. First of all, the first thing I said was like, open up. Let every Nigerian know in ABCD that this is where we are. This is the financial situation. We've made so much. This is what we need to service debts. This is what we need to pay salaries. How do we go forward? Now, when you have that kind of scenario, it becomes easy to talk about members of the high-level political class to say, gentlemen and ladies, we need to have a haircut. Can we possibly have a haircut?
Among themselves.
Among themselves. And when they have that haircut, it will also be easier to ask Nigerians to pay more for things like fuel. Then Nigerians will also demand, well, if we are taking on more sacrifice, can you open up the system in such a way that we really know what comes in, what goes out?
I don't know if the haircut that the ministers had last year still continues.
No, I don't think they took any reasonable haircut.
No, they took during the pandemic. But
even
we don't know
if
if
they
it has continued.
Even if they did,
the president and the vice president.
What they did was superficial. What gives the ministers, the National Assembly's money, and all money is not just those, the ramfack stuff. There are all kinds of things that come in between that you write into the budget, that you procure a brand new Prado 2020 model SUV. They write it into the budget. Yes. Okay? So when you write those kind of things into the budget, you have a plethora, fleet of cars, you have drivers, is fuel at the public expense, your food is all expenses paid, your children more or less paid. These are the kind of things that take away the money. Not just 700,000, a senator brings his slip and says, oh, I received 700, 800,000. That's not the kind of thing. But the 13.5 million Senator Shehu Sani told us was running costs that nobody accounts to. These are the kind of places where we expect a haircut. And not just bring your pay slip to say, oh, that pay slip of 750,000, that's where you take a haircut. Now, beyond that, there's been a lot of talk about bringing the private sector to run even infrastructure and doing quite a lot of things. You remember during the last days of Obasanjo, he had handed over the Port Harcourt refinery to, I think it was the Dangote Group or whatever, and people started crying. His last days, oh, return the national patrimony. Now we are in a situation where we are going to invest very neat, clean money into a sinking pit that we don't have any guarantee, $1.5 billion. Why must we do that? Invite any investor who thinks he has the managerial expertise, the technical capacity, and the financial capacity to turn around those refineries. Give it to them, concession it to them, let them start, and don't throw away good money into a place where we are not sure of what will be the outcome. That's the kind of things we are expecting. That's one. We've talked about implementing the Rosanye Committee report. Let us do it and cut down on waste. Even when we are budgeting, in my office we used to do what we call frivolous, inappropriate, and wasteful expenditure we compile every year. There are so much things that could be cut out from the budget. And then you talk about the independent revenue of the federal government, which comes up to every year. There's always complaints that MDAs, instead of remitting the operating surplus or what is due, of course this year they've talked about 50-50, that the cost, you don't do more than 50%. Let's see how it works so that you get more resources available to implement. And the study we did also showed that our tax expenditure is outrageous. We are losing almost up to 50% of all the money that should have accrued in VAT, in CIT.
So we're not making so much money.
No, we are making the money, but we have already waived it as tax expenditure, as a rebate, or to say tax holiday, or so-called incentive to companies.
Like for example, yeah, build road and give you tax credit,
so that they can invest in the economy. Now, why I say we should review this and put a peg, a ceiling, to say not more than 20% of all revenue accruing can go to tax credit. We've been doing this over the years, the last 15, 20 years. And the expectation was that we will have had a situation where those companies will have expanded. And when they expand, they employ more Nigerians. They now pay more CIT. They help the economy to grow. So if you have been doing something for 10, 15 years and you have forfeited trillions, and there has been no expansion of the economy, rather the economy has been contracting. So it is time to review and cut down on those things that are just simply taking away the money which we are so sure of before we begin to talk of new revenue. And of course, you know, majority of Nigerians that are not tax compliant is like people are not happy with what is happening. There's impression that, are you going to give them this money to join in the one they're already getting from crude oil revenue and other sources which they are not managing properly? So a lot of things can be done to, the other day we were talking about the railways, and we gave the example of the Abuja-Kaduna railway line. We borrowed money from the Chinese to build that railway, but we are still subsidizing it with between 40 and 50 million naira to run the wagons every month. Why do we need to do that? And my simple answer is, you are building railways, it's just like you've constructed a new road. Why don't you leave investors to come and buy the wagons and run? And they may even pay a little to the federal government, some percentage of what they get, so as that every year you can be able to service the tracks to make sure they don't
If we're even
depreciate.
talking about investors, investors are not stupid people too.
Yes.
They watch what happens.
Yes.
Are we really ripe for those kind of
No, why wouldn't we
yeah.
be ripe? Just like you build the roads and ordinary people buy buses, or big companies run buses.
Businesses.
They can get wagons, put them on the road, they will make their money. But you are not going to regulate, the federal government is not going to tell them to charge 1,000 between Kaduna and Abuja. When somebody brings his wagons, he looks at how much he bought the wagons. You also look at the cost of paying staff that will run it. You look at the cost of maintenance. Then he has a reasonable return on investment. And also, if he's paying government any tax, he fixes reasonable tariffs or charges for those wagons to be run profitably. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. We can't be thinking of getting everything free and think the economy will grow. It doesn't work like that.
Okay, finally, and just in less than 1 minute, can debt servicing costs be reduced? Because even the monies we're getting now, we're still servicing debts. And the monies we're using in servicing debts is high. Even though I know the IMF, the World Bank, they were talking about debt forgiveness or debt relief, not totally debt relief, but at least debt extension, debt repayment extension, let me put it that way.
Restructuring of the debts.
Of debt repayment. Is there a way how we can go about our debt servicing costs?
Well, everybody who borrows knows he must pay.
More.
So you can only restructure. Even if you restructure, you are postponing the evil day. That's the only option. But for Nigeria, I'm not particularly excited about all this forgiveness, because when we cleaned the table in 2005, I was around.
Yes.
And some of us were saying, happily, we can now start afresh and behave responsibly.
Again,
But we continued on an
just
irresponsible binge. So we mess up the place, people grant us forgiveness or clean it up for us, and as soon as we finish doing that, we go back again. So that's not the way to go.
All right, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Barrister, for joining us.
My pleasure.
I've been speaking with Barrister Eze Onyekpere, who is a fiscal governance expert as well as the lead director, Center for Social Justice. Thank you all for being a part of the show today and this week. Don't forget to join us on all our social media platforms. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I will see you all next week, God willing. Bye-bye.